cuss out a cop, spit in his face, stomp on the flag and light it up. Yeah, you think you're tough? Well, try that in a small town.
In our current world, being pro-American is as much of a political statement as being Republican or Democrat, even though it shouldn't be that way. And if you make any statement, if you make any gesture that suggests that America has a virtuous moral character as a nation, as it does, then of course you will also be chided and attacked in many different ways. Jason Aldean did this exact thing in his new single, Try This in a Small Town, in which he basically said, he was basically making an ode to small town, little community America, middle of the road America, which is called flyover country by a lot of people who don't understand the virtues of simple living and the virtues of communal cooperation, in which he basically attacked the scenes that we have been seeing coming out of big cities over the past few years of the posting of this video, where we've been seeing people getting carjacked, people getting robbed at gunpoint, people's businesses being burnt down in the name of advancing a political ideology that's supposed to help them. How paradoxical is that? We've been seeing so much stuff happen. And all Aldean said is that you can't do this in certain parts of America. And for that, he has been accused of advocating for lynching. For that, he has been accused of advocating for racism. He himself was actually taken aback by the backlash that he got from a certain contingent of the political dynamic in America and the cultural dynamic in America, that he himself had to say, this message is not political. But I think it actually is political, and we shouldn't run away from that. But it's not political by its nature. It's political due to the era we live in. My friends, it's my contention that Jason Aldean's song is the proper corrective to a culture run away with madness. We need more cultural signaling that talks about the virtue of America and denounces the Marxist political revolutions we have seen transpire in this country over the past few years that have tried to normalize violence, that have tried to normalize hating the American founding, that have tried to normalize hating what is good and what is true, that have tried to normalize the idea of objective truth, objective reality. This revolution we've seen in this nation, which is really a downstream result of the intellectual changes that we saw happen in the mid-20th century, the postmodern turn, all that kind of stuff. These revolutions are coming to a head, and it will be beaten not by a government edict, but by cultural force. But it's important to understand exactly what is getting the outrage. So let us indeed read some lyrics from this song, Try That in a Small Town. I will begin. The song begins by saying, sucker punched somebody on a sidewalk, carjacked an old lady at a red light, pull a gun on the owner of a liquor store. You think it's cool? Well, act like a fool if you like. Cuss out a cop, spit in his face, stomp on the flag and light it up. Yeah, you think you're tough. Well, try that in a small town. See how far you make it down the road. Around here, we take care of our own. You cross that line, it won't take long. For you to find out, I recommend you don't. Try that in a small town. I won't stop here. There's another part of this song that actually is pretty profound to me, and I'm going to explain why I think it's profound in a second. He goes on to say, got a gun that my granddad gave me. Pay close attention to that, my friends. They say one day they're going to round up. Well, that shit might fly in the city. Good luck. Then, of course, it goes down about the small town. So there are a few things contained in those lyrics that are just absolutely profound. Number one, in those lyrics, we see a respect for the wisdom of past generations. See, the essence of being a conservative, which I am, is understanding, not being blindly deferential towards the past and being a slave to what people who were born before you said. No. That's a straw man. Being a conservative is about recognizing the wisdom of the past and having the prudence and the know-how to tie it into our future if it is applicable. And the fundamental thing about America is that America's past wisdom was not rooted in ethnicity, was not rooted in lineage, was not rooted in race, was not rooted in class or social group. It was rooted in universal principles that we as human beings have access to by our very nature as creatures of reason who can rise above passion and then use our reason to capture the creative energies within ourselves and use that to birth civilization. Man has reached mastery when he can use his creativity to create something and build up the civilization that he exists in. That's the conservatism that the American founders put into motion so many years ago, and that's part of what Jason Aldean is talking about here. But according to many left-wing activists, according to some of the major movements we have seen in our country gain traction over the past 2 years, the Antifa, the Black Lives Matter, and according to the ideologies that produce these foul movements, the past is full of oppression. The past is full of evil. The past is full of hierarchy, which is also bad and evil according to them. The past is the quintessential representation of everything wrong in society today. So interestingly enough, these same movements, the feminist movement, for example, which said that the personal is political, and then used history, past history of patriarchal societies, to indict men in the future, they're using a kind of looking at the past generations, but not to learn from them, but to indict them and claim that their views and their actions are still impacting the destinies of people today. See, there's a difference between using history as a guide and viewing history as a determinant. Leftism typically views history as a determinant, not as a guide to inform your actions, if you so choose, but as a force which determines what your actions will be. Why do you think so much in the race debate we hear about social structures? Why do you think so much in the class debate we hear so much about wealth inequality and generational wealth? Why do you think so much in the debate about the equality of the sexes we hear so much about disparate outcomes, meaning injustice? Because all those three positions that I just talked about tie the significance of those issues into the distinctions that are based on a group level while ignoring the individuals that exist within those areas, ignoring the individual men and women who make different decisions and therefore have different outcomes. Ignoring, for example, the differences in life experience, differences and so many other things that might produce inequality and wealth and resources, which is natural. No total and perfect equality in resources is not possible. It's just not possible whatsoever. Ignoring the fact that, again, there are plenty of cultural determinants and cultural factors that go into why certain racial categories have more or less or whatever. Ignoring the fact that a generational curse need not be your future. A generational predicament need not be your current situation. And in fact, we have many stories that prove that man, when invested with his free will, invested with his potential, invested with opportunity, can rise from that generational sickness. But again, to say what I just said, you have to presume free will. And to do that, you have to presume that the individual is the mover of his life, not grand historical theories that encompass him in this sort of group-based thinking that ultimately reduce him and nullify his importance as an actor in the world. So, deference to past generations, they don't like that very much. But also, cooperation as it relates to values. See, in communities in small-town America, people share their values and exercise their values more readily than they could in a bigger city, because statistically, in bigger cities, you have a more dense population, there's more people, so there's going to be less interaction. Whereas in some towns in America, you go into a grocery store, and if you're a local in that town, you know every single person. You know the clerk, you know the manager, you know the people who are shopping at the store. I've lived in a small town in America before. I've had this experience, and it's really wonderful. It can be. There's downsides to it too. There's downsides to everything, by the way. Sometimes people get a little bit too nosy, and they're in your business, and they're intrusive. But at least you know there's a safety net. I remember I used to have neighbors who, when I left home, would say, hey, if I see anything happening around your house, I'll let you know, I'll call you. And sure as heck, they most certainly did if they ever saw anything that's suspicious. That's community. That's exercising your values concretely. But when you do that, what happens is people begin recognizing you for the unique person you are, and your individuality is seen. Because again, people don't interact with these abstract groups. People interact with concrete individuals. But anything that gives the individual legitimacy, anything that says that values are not based on your identity, but they are instead based on those whom you get into community with, anything that affirms that kind of worldview is deemed to be anathema to the other worldview, which is dominant. Which is why do you think left-wing commentators can easily say, oh, this is a song about lynching? I'll give you the verbal and mental jiu-jitsu they go around. They can say it like this, for example. They can say that at one point in time, small town America were called sundown towns. For those of you who do not know what that is, look it up. And in those towns, black people, after the sun went down, could not go in those towns without being subject to lynching and killing. Therefore, any attempt to evoke small town America in a song is a dog whistle to white supremacy. That's how it goes. Now, what's the problem of this? Small town America is being seen as an abstraction, not as a place full of people with values and individual behaviors which actually define the place. Whenever you characterize a place, whenever you assign this sort of abstract idea to a certain place or a certain ideology or a certain people, rather than actually seeing it play out in reality, you can make that ideology, you can make that place or make that person whatever and whoever you want it to be. And in the mind of these left-wing commentators, they have made that place. They have made these concepts. They have made those people evil, racist perpetuators of inequality and inequity. That's how this works. But it all stems from a rotten epistemic foundation, which is on display in the criticisms of Aldean's song. My friends, think about this. In big city America, just going to use the same language that we've been using here for sake of simplicity. Over the past few years, we have seen millions of dollars in loss. Kenosha, Minneapolis, Baltimore, all kinds of cities, in the name of equity. And we have seen those arsonists, those rioters, those property destroyers justified with the phrase, riots are the voice of the oppressed. People sitting in the media offices, people sitting in left-wing intelligentsia, quite literally justify the destruction of private property and the destruction of their own cities by saying that riots are the voice of the oppressed. They added a moral value to what is an obviously immoral action. But that's much harder to do in a small town, because the only way you can really act against your enemy in such a grotesque way is to assume your enemy is this terrible thing and to paint this picture in your head of your enemy. But if you actually know your enemy, you might actually humanize them. And if you humanize your enemy, you might actually see some merit in their views, or not even in their views, in who they are as a person, which would then make it harder for you to commit violence and aggression against them. And that is what happens all the time in small town America. People have the greater possibility of seeing you for who you are. Again, it's not always this simple. There are, of course, exceptions. There are, of course, problems. There are, of course, all kinds of things that come along being a small town. But I'm saying the possibility is there that whereas if you're in a big city like New York City with millions of people in it, it's impossible for even a majority or a plurality of the people in that city to see you for who you are, because there's just too much to see. And quite frankly, in that environment, you are lost in the ocean. The virtue of small town America, as alluded to by Aldean and company, is not merely that people get to talk to you a lot and you get to see people that you know regularly, but it's that people have a greater chance of knowing who you are as a person, as a human being, not as a thought, not as an abstract picture painted in the head of your political opponent. And that makes the connection, that makes the bond ever so stronger. Man is at his core a social animal. And that sociability is the core root of human interaction. Without sociability, civilization ceases to exist. And sociability brings rise to the principle of justice. And justice simply says there is an ethical imperative conferred upon all of us to protect what our neighbor has by refraining from taking it without just cause, to protect his good name by refraining from slandering it without just cause, to fulfill our promises, our contracts, our obligations, and our duties, and to ensure that we are doing what we are required to in the context of all of the things I just said. But in a society where justice is seen as social, it's seen as an abstract idea, not connected to particular individuals, but instead to particular groups, you can then therefore more easily demonize and attack your fellow man as being a part of the opposing group, and then go ahead and take his stuff while feeling righteous about it. We need a cultural corrective like this song to beat back that poor mentality. We need a cultural corrective like this song to affirm that yes, the past is not just full of horror, it's also full of a lot of merit and a lot of joy and a lot of splendor. We need a cultural corrective that will say that individuals sharing values, being spiritual entities, not being reduced to who they are on an identity-based level or where they came from or whatever, that is the true essence of what makes society tick. We need a cultural corrective that will rise up against the mediocrity we have been seeing in our media, we have been seeing in our political conversation. And my friends, I don't mean to speak up Aldean all that much, because again, I don't even listen to country music normally, although this song was good. But I do mean to say that if more songs are produced like this, I do believe the culture can be shepherded back to a healthy place. But more importantly than that, we need a revolution of the mind, my friends. We need a revolution of the mind where the first principles of philosophical thinking are put at the forefront of our society, and the sort of surface level apprehension of the world is abandoned and relegated to the trash heap of history where it belongs. When you can understand why things are what they are, and you can think about things in a logical manner, and you can reinforce that with a rich philosophical worldview, you will be able to quite easily imbue those small town values that Aldean talks about in any location you go with, because you will be a vessel pouring forth with these ideas. But we need the revolution of the mind. Country music, TV, and the establishment of music and whatever other institutions that benefit from having certain ideas that I just mentioned being pushed, forget them. The revolution of the mind starts with you. And my friends, I intend to lead this revolution of the mind. Study philosophy, study history, understand that values are spiritual and not indicative of your identity, but they're indicative of your soul. And that there's nothing more fulfilling than mutually beneficial communal interactions that affirm just what it means to be a social animal, to be a human being. And nothing is more beautiful than that as well. My friends, I love you all so much. Like this video, comment on this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel, and please stay pensive. God bless. Bye-bye.